Hello and welcome to another movie review on HSG, and this particular flick actually ties into a couple of other movies which I reviewed recently on the channel. Some English, some not, and most notably I would say one which I did a couple of days ago called Your Son, a Spanish movie, and a couple of weeks ago called The Fury of a Patient Man, also a Spanish flick. If you enjoy this movie or this genre of revenge thriller, definitely watch those. They are more intense than this movie. With that being said, I've heard a lot of critics say that this movie is kind of bleak, maybe a little bit depressing, almost difficult to watch to some degree. I don't really get that. I mean, I kind of do, but I feel like critics who say that this movie is difficult to watch probably haven't seen a huge amount of these other revenge thrillers, especially the ones that I mentioned, because this one, yeah, it's intense, it's certainly more bleak, but I think that some people kind of mistake being bleak for being kind of disturbing or something. It doesn't really work that way for me. But then again, maybe I'm desensitized. You know, 2 of my top 5 favourite movies are Old Boy and Martyrs, so I like intense cinema. So this, to me, is not a particularly intense movie, however, I do think it's a very good one. The fact that it's English, for a start, will make a lot of people easier, make a lot of people feel easier about watching it. You don't have to read subtitles, for instance, and the essential plot is fairly simple. It's a homeless guy who's pretty down on his luck by the look of things. He's kind of timid, a little bit waifish, not much to him, certainly not an intimidating looking guy, who hears that a bad guy has been released from jail in his hometown who hurt his family, so he wants to go back and get revenge. It's about as simple a story as you can get, but it's great because it immediately gets you behind the character. He's homeless, he's down and out, so you already like the guy and want him to succeed, and he's got this justified revenge against the guy who hurt his family. It's all you need. But where it goes from there is not a John Wick style movie, and that is why I like this one, because as great as the John Wicks and, all those equalizers, all that kind of thing are, even Extraction more recently, which isn't really a revenge flick, but you can kind of throw it in there as well. Those movies, they spend a lot of time on certain things and not much time on others. The tooling up phase, for instance, that's usually like a Rocky montage in these movies. It's like, get gun, get suit, go kill. It's like nothing in the story. In this one, how would a guy who has no experience with a gun, or really any significant weapon, how would he go about getting one? How would he go about using one? And also, is he even competent enough to use one? That is what a lot of this movie is about, competency. And in that way, it reminds me quite a bit of Your Son, the Spanish movie which I reviewed a couple of days ago. I would recommend even watching those 2 movies back to back, this one and Your Son, because they're a similar experience, but at the same time, their approaches and even outcomes are different enough to make it worth watching both back-to-back, I think. They're certainly not the same experience, they just have some similarities. Both of them take their time a bit more. This one has a little bit more action, though, a little bit more blood and gore, and the character he's almost easy to get behind and hard to get behind at the same time, because you want to like him, you want him to succeed, but he's not the most confident guy, he's not the most competent guy, he does do a couple of stupid things, and yet he's kind of got this adorable kind of naivety to him, where he's not stupid, he's just not experienced. And most of us can relate to not being experienced at doing something at some point. And you can almost see that part of yourself in him in certain parts of the films when you just don't know what you're doing in a certain situation. Except for most of us, that thing that we didn't know what we were doing probably meant that you failed your car test, or that you, dropped something at work. In this situation, it means he's dead if he gets it wrong. So yeah, he's kind of justified in being nervous. And I like that aspect of the movie. I think it's actually portrayed very well, because you could easily cross that invisible line into slapstick and make him an idiot. The movie doesn't do that, but it's very close. And I think that some people might find him to be a little bit of an annoying character, maybe a little bit too dumb. I didn't find that, as I said, but I can understand it if some people would. I think that if you're going to have an issue with this movie, it would be with him. because there's nothing really about the rest of the film that you could get too annoyed with. It's very well made, the story is good, it's refreshingly different to most other, revenge thrillers, drama thrillers, and I would definitely recommend checking it out. I like the way the film looks, I like the way the story plays out, the fact that it's technically a slow burn, but at the same time didn't actually feel that slow. Something is always happening in the story, even though it's not non-stop action. And I like that. There's some interesting choices of weapon, some interesting violence, and interesting interplays between characters that you might not expect. Yeah, I liked it across the board. So if you haven't seen the movie, of course, pretty much stop now in the video before we get into the spoiler side. But check out the flick first, then come back. So now let's get into spoiler talk. What can we talk about in terms of spoilers? Well, there are two things in particular that I'll probably bring up about this movie. One is the kill, the kill that matters, and the second one is the ending. So first of all, to talk about that kill. Typically, you would not get revenge that quickly in a movie. And of course, technically, he didn't. But as far as he was concerned, that was a pretty short story. In fact, it almost seems like the movie could have been a short story that was then extended. But I kind of like that, because as soon as he gets that revenge, because you don't know any better at the time, you're kind of thinking, well, what's going to happen now? Now that he's got revenge, where's the movie going? And then relatively quickly you start to figure out, okay, this movie actually isn't about the revenge. It's about surviving the revenge. And that, I think, is a great twist, because each of these revenge thrillers, even the ones that I've talked about on the channel, they each show off this very interesting sub-aspect of the genre. And I think that this is something which a lot of people don't give these movies credit for, and it's something which, for instance, the zombie genre could do well to learn from. Most zombie movies don't really try anything radically different. And although some would argue you don't need to, a lot of people would, because you can kind of get bored of it. What I mean by that when it comes to these ones is the fury of a patient man deals with the anger and intensity of revenge. Your son deals with the confidence and competence of a revenge, and the brokenness of the system and the oppression of everyone around you. This movie deals with the fallout of vengeance. Other movies have more emotional sides as well, like You Were Never Really Here with Joaquin Phoenix. That's got more almost the emotional and mental breakdown side of revenge. I love how each of these movies, despite being in a similar enough genre to classify them together, they take such a different approach each time. This one, as I said, is one of the most unique in that sense because it really does deal with after the fact. Because usually where this movie gets going is where most of these movies end. He's got revenge. Yay, walks off into the sunset. Well, what now? There's got to be family members of the deceased who want revenge themselves. This movie deals with that, and that, I think, is what makes it so good. And of course, to jump to the ending as far as spoilers, the ending, I think, was fairly predictable. Not in a bad way, but this is one of those movies where you think he is probably going to die. But there's two ways of doing that. You can kind of think, this character has nothing to live for, he's going to die, and it's going to be a noble death. You know, his loved one is dead, he doesn't care if he dies, he's going to go out guns blazing. Then you've got the other aspect where you think this character could die because they're not competent enough. And you want them to succeed, but you kind of feel like they're not going to. That could easily be done badly. You could easily have, as I said earlier on in the video, a dumb character who you could almost want to die. To me, this character skates the line very well. He's about as close to that line as you can get without you wanting him to fail, because he is kind of inept sometimes. But, as I said, kind of in this lovable way, at least for me. And it's a movie which does give you the catharsis that you want, but at the same time, the weight of a decision like taking revenge is still shown. He doesn't just ride off into the sunset. He pays his due. And I think that was an appropriate ending. This is the kind of movie within this genre which I personally won't go back to quite as much as some others. I don't consider this to be as good a movie as something like The Fury of a Patient Man or even Your Son in terms of the emotion put across and even the filmmaking, but I do think that this one is probably a little bit more accessible than both of those. It does give you a little bit more violence, a little bit more catharsis, and the fact that it's not subtitles will appeal to a lot more people. So if you're newer to this genre, then, well, if you checked out this one, and I hope you have if you're watching this part of the video, then I would definitely recommend checking out those other ones that I mentioned, because they're not quite as forgiving. They're a little bit slower, more emotional, more realistic even, and darker than this one. And this movie can be bleak, but I wouldn't necessarily call this one dark. This one is almost on the border, I think, between the two, but on a little bit more of the lighter side. But overall, I'd love to hear your thoughts down below on Blue Ruin. It is definitely a good film, as far as I'm concerned, though, and of course, stick around on the channel for more reviews. So until next time, I'll see you then. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.